Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. Let's move on to the 6.2 subtopic. 6.2 subtopic is an absorption spectrum of photosynthetic pigment. Then in this subtopic, the student will learn the type of photosynthesis pigments involved in photosynthesis. Before we learn about the photosynthetic pigment, firstly we need to know the nature of light. Light are the electromagnetic energy travel in rhythmic wave. So light are travel in the form of wave. Right? Then the entire range of electromagnetic radiation is the electromagnetic spectrum. The most important segment for light is a narrow band between 380 nanometer and 750 nanometer. Then this area called visible light. Then the energy is inversely proportional to the wavelength. The longer the wavelength, right? The longer the wavelength have less energy than do the shorter one. So in other words, you can say that the light with the shorter wavelength contain high energy level, while the light with the longer wavelength contain the lower energy level. While light travels as a wave, many of its properties are those of a discrete particles known as the photon. A photon with a shorter wavelength pack more energy, which is photon with a shorter wavelength contain more energy than when the light mix matter. So when the light mix matter, so it may be reflected or it may be transmit. Okay? Mean they go through the matters or they can be absorbed. Okay, the light being absorbed by the matters. Then photosynthetic pigments are the substances that are absorb light. That are absorb the visible light in the narrow band between the 300 nanometer to the 750 nanometer. Okay, suggest that violet, blue and red light work best for photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, this is the best area where the light is absorbed by the photosynthetic pigment. Then the green is the least effective color that will be reflected. Photosynthetic pigment are differ in their absorption spectrum. Then the chlorophyll are the most important photosynthetic pigment in plant leaf. Chlorophyll A, okay, with the red graph above, are the dominant pigments in the plant leaf and absorb best in the red and blue wavelength. So they absorb best in the red area, okay, this area. Then the blue, okay, blue. Then there are least absorb the green. Then chlorophyll B with a slightly different structure with the chlorophyll A has a different absorption spectrum. Okay, so chlorophyll B shown by the graph blue, below the blue graph. So they are showing that these chlorophyll B are absorbed a different area of the light spectrum. Then the chlorophyll B function in funnels or channels the energy from their wavelength to a chlorophyll A. Then other pigments with different structure have different absorption spectra. In photosynthesis, chlorophyll A act as a primary pigment. Then chlorophyll B and other types of the photosynthetic pigment act as a accessory pigment. So what is the function of the primary pigments? So primary pigment is the pigment that are participate directly in the light dependent reaction, which is its function in the convert the light energy to chemical energy. So the primary pigment is a pigment that are function directly in the conversion of the light energy from the sunlight to the chemical energy in form of ATP and NADPH. While the accessory pigment is a function is to function in capture the light and transfer it to the chlorophyll A, which is transfer it to the primary pigment. Then the accessory pigment is the pigment which is initiate the light dependent reaction. So what is the importance of the accessory pigment in the photosynthesis process? So accessory pigment is the pigment that enhance the light spectrum absorption. So as we know, the chlorophyll A only have a certain area of the absorption spectrum. So with the accessory pigment, so there are more of the absorption spectrum, or there are more light can be absorbed by the photosynthetic pigment. Okay, then the second is photo protection. So they absorb, if the photosynthetic pigment absorb excessive light energy, that it will damage the chlorophyll. So when there are more chlorophyll involved in the photosynthesis, so it will prevent the chlorophyll from becoming damaged. All chlorophylls comprises a complex ring system called a phosphoring ring, and this is a phosphoring ring. Okay, and a long hydrocarbon tails, and this is a long hydrocarbon tails of the chlorophyll. So the tail is lipid solubles, they are because they are made by hydrocarbon, so they are hydrophobic, okay, or lipid soluble, and they are normally embedded in the thylakoid membrane. Then the phosphine ring, which is hydrophilic, okay, phosphine ring is hydrophilic, so they are lies on the surface of the thylakoid membrane, okay, or the surface of the thylakoid structure. The second group of pigment involved are the carotenoids, okay, with the yellow graph. Then the basic structure comprises of two small rings. This is a structure of the carotenoids. Okay, they have two small rings which is linked by the long hydrocarbon chains. Then the carotenoids is the pigments which normally absorb light in the blue violet range, okay, to the violet, which is violet in the blue range. So they are absorbed best at the blue violet range. Then there are two main types of carotenoids occurring in the plant leaf, which is carotenes and xanthophylls. In thylakoid membrane, chlorophyll is organized along with protein and smaller organic molecule into photosystem. So a photosystem acts like a light gathering antenna complex consisting of a few hundred chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoid molecules. When any antenna molecule absorb a photon, so when the antenna pigment absorb a photon, all right, so the energy is transmitted. The energy is transmitted from one molecule to another molecules, okay, until it reaches a particular chlorophyll A molecules. So it's a chlorophyll A molecule which is act as a reaction center. Then at the reaction center is a primary electron acceptor. So this is a primary electron acceptor, right, which is remove an excited electron from the reaction center of chlorophyll A. So the center normally will remove the electron and receive by the primary electron acceptor. So the removal of the excited electron by the reaction center will start the light reaction. There are two types of photosystem involved in the photosynthesis or in the light dependent reaction, which is photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. So photosystem 1 has a reaction center chlorophyll, the P700 center, then that has an absorption peak at 700 nanometer, while the photosystem 2 has a reaction center P680 with a peak at 680 nanometer. These two photosystems work together to use light energy to generate ATP and NADPH in light dependent reaction.